Hey folks, Steve here with a special review video for you today. We're going to be talking about Highway to the Kremlin 2 from Operational Studies Group designed by Kevin Zucker, an entry in the Campaigns of Napoleon series, or I guess in some ways you could consider it the Napoleon at Bay series. Um, this is the only entry that is the 5x scale, so it's 5 times as big in terms of scale as other games in the series, but there is also 2x, so just know that we're talking about a very zoomed out coverage, and of course it is covering the invasion of Russia, the French army struggling to get to Moscow in the inevitable retreat back. I shouldn't say inevitable because it is possible for you to achieve victory in this game, which is interesting in and of itself. Um, Now, this is the game that I have been preoccupied with for the last 2 months. I have played a lot of video coverage for you to watch on the channel if you want to take a much closer look at the game. I've done enough coverage at this point that this video will be in a more abbreviated format where I'm just going to be talking about the game and my experience with it. If you want to see close-up video of the components and how the game plays. I have hours and hours of coverage to view here. So we're really going to be talking about what are the takeaways after that gameplay experience here. And I have to say, this game certainly took me on a journey of learning it and absorbing the rules. We're going to talk more about that. I want to start at a kind of neutral place and talk about the components as a starting point, just so you know what you get. So everything in the game has, I think, pretty reasonable components. The box is, medium fare. You can see there's a little bit of flaring here with the box lid, but the box is nice. It looks nice. The maps, in particular, are really quite nice. They are paper maps. I don't see that as a negative. I maybe even prefer paper maps these days because I'm just going to put plexiglass over it most of the time. Um, and the map is just beautiful, right? So take a quick look at pictures or even the rest of my videos, and you will see beautiful artwork of the map. It is really nice to look at. It is reasonably clear in terms of like translating what's on the map to like the game mechanics. It's all pretty clear, and it just looks really nice. It just looks nice set up. Um, it's a real joy to look at. So that maybe is something you can expect from many OSG titles where they're doing the map. It is uh, very nice, very very good. I'll also say that the counters. We're not going to do a close up here, folks, but the counters are ultimately, I believe these would be brown core counters, and they hold up pretty nice. I did round the corners of my game, and I do feel like that really made them just look a little bit spiffier. And something to be said, this is a weird topic to hit. I actually quite like the counter art, which this that seems like an odd thing to care about or to even bring up, but just the way that the counters are laid out, I quite like. There's a lot of ways that you can do counters wrong. I mean, these are ultimately NATO counters. At their heart, they show various values. But in terms of the actual art, you could do a lot wrong. I've seen games published by other publishers where they'll use like a gradient, and the counter will be like blue and red, and it fades between the two, and it just looks really like an odd looking counter. These are all stable looking, very nice looking counters. Again, weird thing to bring up, but I appreciate it when I can just go, yep, that counter is very clear, it's very readable, I know what it's doing, I know what I need out of that counter. It that is a good thing, and I do appreciate just having clean NATO symbols supporting that. It makes things very easy to understand at the game table. So the components are nice. Now the rule books here, something to be said. You do have the standard rules and then the game exclusive rules. And unfortunately, while the rule books are generally fine, they're going to be mostly black and white, 2-column format, and they're just we'll say matte, plain paper. In terms of usability, they're fine from like they're not gonna fall apart on you. They're fine. But having the two rule books is a challenge, and it is because it is supposed to be a series game where, maybe someday there was going to be a 5x Spain game, which would be really interesting. Unfortunately, it's not come out. So you have a standard rules, which at least today are really just for Highway to the Kremlin, and the exclusive rules for Highway to the Kremlin. And you will find yourself having to dart back and forth between the rule books quite a bit. So that's a mechanical thing of the components, a physical mechanical bit that you're going to have to deal with when you're playing the game or learning the game, is flipping back between the two rule books. Now, there's plenty of other series that work similarly. I'll just say that the uh, amount of game specific rules is enough that you're going to have to really dig into these. It's not like some series games where maybe those game exclusive rules are 4 to 6 pages at maximum. There's quite a bit here to try to absorb and incorporate into your understanding of the rules. Now, the game also comes with a number of different player aid cards that support setup, that support, uh, you know, slight adjustments to your turn one or scenario one setups. Setup charts galore for both the French and the Russians, respectively, orange and blue. And generally, the player aid charts are helpful. So you get plenty of those. Now, they're card stock, they're not necessarily just paper. You also have a game charts, we'll call it a fold out. That is softer paper. You're going to want to be careful with that. You don't damage it. You might want to laminate it or print off extra copies or something, photocopy it. So the game certainly gives you plenty to work with, and that's good. You will need a fair amount of table space. So this is two maps uh, together, and then you're going to have the organizational charts, which, if you've seen the videos, are used to actually keep track of the strength of your forces on the map. You're going to need a fair amount of table real estate. This is not going to be a game that's going to be supportable for everyone because their tables aren't going to be big enough, or they're not going to be able to leave it up long enough to play the whole thing. So keep that in mind. If you're used to just working with a 22 by 34 map on your table and you can't afford double that or more, this might be a challenge for you. Now, I need to hit what will be probably the most negative part of the review here. It's kind of hidden in the middle, but I want to talk to it. I think the rules, in terms of what they intend to portray, work just fine. However, the way that they are conveyed to the reader, and in particular someone who's never played the system before, is not that good. And I'll say that it's because there are certain aspects of the rules that are hidden from you. That's a harsh way of putting it, but it is something I struggled with. And in fact, if you've been watching this series of me covering this game since the beginning, you know I nearly scrapped a whole bunch of videos because I was getting stuff wrong. And I was getting stuff wrong because either the verbiage is not super clear in the rules at times, or sometimes the wording could lead you to multiple interpretations, and you're having to either pick one or ask one. Now, I will say, Kevin Zucker has been awesome about answering questions in email, and I've been engaged with him along the way, and that has helped a great deal. So you are behooved to play a game by Kevin Zucker, and if you ask a question and you try to frame it up as best you can, he can give you an answer. That's really great. So thank you, Kevin, if you're watching this, for supporting me in learning the game. I think the trick with this really is, I think the game needed more at-play development. So, and this is tricky because I realize I'm probably the only person who's reviewed this game on video. I have to go look to see if anyone else has done it. This game maybe isn't getting played by a whole lot of people, which means that for those chosen few who are trying to play the game like myself, I'm not sitting on the bedrock of experience that other games maybe have had and have influenced errata for much longer. Um, so I'm discovering things either in the setup charts that are a little weird, maybe need some clarifications, or maybe are just straight up errata that don't make much sense, um, or finding in the rules that like this really critical sentence, this really important part of like, hey, you have to switch strength points, excuse me, um, between nationalities, or you can't swap strength points between nationalities. You would think that would be in one part of the rules, but it's not. And in fact, it's in the summary of that rule rather than the rule itself. That's frustrating. That's frustrating to deal with. And I wish I didn't have to do that. It got to the point where I created a 2-page bulleted player aid called Easily Forgotten Rules to help a player not miss these important aspects. Where, again, maybe a sentence is hidden amongst all the different rule sections. It's maybe not where you would expect it to be. So, yeah, the rules have given me a lot of trouble. And they're likely going to give trouble to folks who are not familiar with the system. And there's going to be things that show up, like in one case, there's a sentence in the rules that references a rule that doesn't exist in the game, um, is actually trying to address something that's in some of the other campaigns of Napoleon games. But if you've not played any of those, there's no context to the sentence in the rules. So you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to me. Well, maybe if you had played the other games, it would click. But there's not a designer note. There's no indicator that that's what the point of that sentence is. So it's this really weird, out of place sentence in the rules. So I think that is probably the biggest knock against this game, is that the rules feel like they need some more development or refinement with errata. I don't think that the latest version of the rules are easily findable on the Napoleon Games website. I got a copy from Kevin, which is great, but um, it just feels like even with the latest rules that you can get, there are these weird things. And I feel like you could. I don't want to say there should be a highway to the Kremlin II. I do think that there needs to be a pretty significant living rules uh, glow up to help the game, because I feel like it's close. It's not that far away. There's some things that just need to be clarified. And I think if you're willing to just accept that, like, hey, if you're going to do that, expect the rule books to increase in size a little bit, because you're adding either, well, one, you're fixing what may be errata, or you're rewording things so that they're clear, and maybe adding design notes along the way so you can better explain kind of why the rule is the way that it is, would help a lot. And then, you add in stuff like easily forgotten rules, and you kind of work your way up to it. I think the game can have these things resolved, is what I'm saying. But it feels like it needs a little more cooking. So again, I don't know that we need a Highway to the Kremlin 3. I think the rule books need additional refinement at this point. Now the game's been out for a while, so it's like, it's the attention. The more folks play a game, the more it's like, oh, what about this? What about that? And a game gets hot with fresh errata, living rules, things are fixed up and updated, or clarifications are made. And there's not a lot of people playing this game. So I think that's a part of it. I think that it's not, every little nuance can be kind of, you can wave it off and you can get over it. Or you can substitute your own sort of house rule to smooth it over and you can keep playing. Certainly possible. I do wish that this rule set got more refinement, because it's close, guys. That's the thing. I think it's frustratingly close to being where it needs to be, and it's hard when you're stumbling over the rocky road and you're like, oh man, there's that pothole. We could fix that. We can fix that. We can fill that in. We kind of know what's supposed to be said there. Um, or more examples of play would have been very helpful. and there's not a lot of examples of play, so you're really left to interpret how the game is really supposed to work. That's probably the other big negative against the game, is the lack of examples of play. Now that's a luxury that we enjoy in a lot of other war games. Other publishers will tend to hit that. A game is, I think it's like a force multiplier for making your game understandable, is with examples of play, because you have to spend page count to do it. You have to include pictures. But when you do it, it helps so much. It helps the player take the words that you've conveyed as the rule in action to solidify the understanding. That's exactly what they mean. And if there's this weird edge case, you can, maybe the example of play is showing a weird edge case to help make it a closed system. There's no room for interpretation. This is what that rule means, together with everything else that's in the game. That would have helped this game a lot. Now, I think if I look out at other games in the series, there are some more examples of play in some of the other games, so it's just like they didn't have them in this one. That's, to me, a really big missed opportunity. Examples of play just help so much. Again, it helps to transfer from the designer and the developer the way the game is supposed to be played to the person reading the rules to solidify that understanding, and it provides a way for two players, if there's a disagreement on the way that the rule is supposed to work, like, here's the example, that's the way it works in the example, that's the way that the game works. That would have been a huge help, but it wasn't here. So it led to some stumbling, again, issues in rules interpretation, which ordinarily I think I'm pretty good at, but I myself had some problems. Maybe a lot of that's on me. So that's the big negative here, guys. I'd say that there's a not steep, but there's a learning curve. I've flattened that curve a little bit with my experience and what I've tried to put out with the player aid to help folks absorb how to play. So learn from my mistakes, learn from my experience. I think somebody who was going to buy this game or have their copy and are going to play it today is better off than they were before, because they can lean on some of these helpful things. Learn from my mistakes. There's some examples out there of what not to do, maybe. And it was a community effort, I should say, with people commenting on mistakes on my videos and helping get to the right place. Someone now can learn from that, which is a really good thing. So you are not going to have, if you're watching this video now and you're not sure about the game, it will be easier for you if you lean into some of the material that's out there now. But it could be a struggle. Okay, it's a lot of negative. What are the positives of the game? Well, there's a lot, actually. This is the funny thing. The rules being what they are, I think once I reached the top of the curve, of the learning curve, everything else was golden. And that's this is what's really hard for me to talk about. It's like, man, the rules obstacle course is so difficult in terms of, like, man, I wish that were clear. I wish the words were written a little bit more clearly. I wish it referenced things a little bit more systematically, or, like, I wish it was, this about the rules. But in play, when you're playing the game and you're playing it correctly, the game has a lot to offer, okay? And it has a lot to offer, I think, in comparison to other games that cover the same topic. So there's Kutuzov, a card-driven game from GMT that's a bit older. That's a card-driven game. It has issues where there's some really powerful cards that can come out. The card luck is another factor on top of dice luck. So Kutuzov's an okay game. It's fine. It's fair. I think it's a fun game to play. But it doesn't force you to make the decisions in quite the same fidelity level as this game. There's a game from VUCA Games that looks really interesting. But again, I don't know that it's as detailed a treatment as this game is. And this game stretches that operational strategic bit here, 5x, so it's very zoomed out. But there is a lot for the player to consider in terms of operational management of your forces on the map and thinking about things in multiple dimensions. So to me, that's a very good thing. And the game does that. It does that in the way that you operate on the map with your units and your leaders. So The way that the game operates, the sequence of play is generally there's an administrative phase where you're going to roll weather. Weather does affect things. That's good. It's just something you can't account for. Weather could turn bad when you don't think it's going to, or it's got a low chance to. That's always fun. That affects attrition. That might affect combat or the way that armies can engage or disengage from each other. And then you're worried about getting administrative points. And administrative points are these really valuable uh, resource that both players are managing. The more you have, it means the greater that your supply and logistics network have remained stable, is kind of how I sort of interpret that. And you can spend that administrative points to guarantee that a leader near your main center of operations, your main logistics hub, goes off and does what you want them to do. You sort of spend some of those resources, the logistics, to make sure that army force, or I should just say force, that force is going to go do the thing that you want them to try to go do. That's great. But you're spending that hard to get resource, and it's die rolls that give you more of these points. There are ways to get additional points, but it means taking what is usually your best leader away from the front lines and back running traffic cop for the supply wagons. And in fact, I did that quite a bit with Napoleon. Napoleon has to sit back with your center of operations, and you get additional AP for doing that. And that's something you want to do, especially as the French across the campaign. Because what will happen is, the further you go into Russia, the further you're away from your originating supply source, your, we'll say, effective AP level gets worse. There's a term in the rules called attenuation, where the further out you go, the less that your AP level will actually be when you calculate attrition. And that's one of the ways that AP really affects the game, is attrition. So the further out you are, the less your supply logistics can operate or operate efficiently. And that's with the idea that, hey, every additional mile is one more mile that the supply wagons have to get to the next link in the chain and the next link in the chain. So the further you go, the harder it is to get supplies out there. This is a really interesting idea if you're familiar with military logistics. Like, all that's like, wow, that's something you have to worry about. The further out that is, especially with things like wagons and animal-drawn resources, how do you get that out there? So you're managing this resource. You're trying to figure out a way to keep that resource increasing, where at times you're needing to spend it on your forces. If you don't do that, you're leaving your forces to operate based on initiative. And this is where the leaders come into play, where there are certainly leaders that are much better than others, that they are better at combat because they have a bonus star on their counter, meaning they can improve their combat die roll. You also have their command span, which governs how leaders can manage the forces underneath them. And so you're managing not only the movement of your forces, but how they're organized on the map. And that's actually trickier than you might think once you get the rules right in your head, where you don't want to overstack, and in many cases you would find that you would maybe end up overstacking. So when you're moving your forces on the board, again, it's, am I going to spend some of my logistics capacity to make sure that a crappy leader like Eugene goes and does the thing we want him to do? Or can I get my operating groups underneath leaders like Davout and Napoleon, who are going to usually activate on initiative and be able to go where you want them to go, regardless, because they've got pretty good die rolls to activate and do the thing they need to do. Now, every time you move, you're going to be rolling on a interestingly complex attrition chart. I say interestingly complex because there are multiple factors and rows. It's like a multi-axle chart, I don't know the right word for it, where you're looking at how far am I moving my force, then you're rolling a die. There are modifiers to that die, and then you're going to look in that column for how big is the force as compared to your functional supply level for your administrative points. That sounds really complicated. It's really not that bad. It's pretty straightforward once you get going and you understand kind of how to look at the chart. But what it does is it forces the player to really think about how they're moving. And that very difficult choice of, am I going to push my forces as far as they can go with the knowledge that it's going to mean attrition and the loss of strength points? And you're continually having to make that choice throughout the game, especially on forced marches, which are moves that you can do on your opponent's turn before they have their combat phase. And you can use that to disengage from the enemy, sort of withdraw out of their Zoc. There are Zocs that govern the game to a degree. Or are you going to move forces into a hex that is already about to be engaged to reinforce them? But that forced march is punishing on attrition, so you really have to think about, is the juice worth the squeeze? And you're constantly trying to figure that out, where you have a band of results based on how big the force is, your connection to your line of communication and supply, and how far are you going to push those those men. And then, okay, there's a die roll. So is it going to be as bad as I thought, or am I going to suffer more attrition? That could put me in a bad spot, which leads to the combat, where a lot of the time you're going to find that the combat results table you're going to be using, the column, is either going to be a 1 to 2 odds, 1 to 1, or 2 to 1. And it's not usually going to be too different from that unless you're picking off a small detachment of the main army of your enemy with a bigger force. And so you losing a strength point or two to attrition is going to shift that column maybe in the direction you don't want it to. And just that one shift is enough to really change the way that the armies are dancing around each other and how you want to operate. So that operational element of the game is extremely strong, and I like it a lot. It means that every counter move, this is not a very counter dense game, but every counter move is going to matter quite a bit in terms of where you're going, what are you doing, what are you doing to operate with the constraints that you have. Which leads us to the combat, where, interestingly, the game has a very nuanced combat system, which is really interesting, and it's hard to summarize in this review video, but the element of it is both sides are going to pick a combat chit, and that is going to govern what happens if you lose. Not if you win, if you lose. And that is either going to be pursuit, meaning you're going to try to run away, or you're going to give a pitched battle, which means you're going to be able to counterattack and maybe be locked in combat with your opponent for multiple rounds, which will be deadly no matter what. Now, a lot of the time you're going to pick pursuit, but the fact that you have that choice matters quite a lot. There is actually a third option called a buy. It works a bit like a pitched battle. There's some nuance here, guys. I can't read the whole rulebook to you, but the whole process is very interesting. You're looking at, well, what happens if I retreat, if I lose? And so you're sort of baking into a contingency to some degree. Do I want to fight a pitched battle? If I do, I know it's going to be bloody. I could still win. I could come out ahead if it's a pitched battle and I lose the first round. But what are the different ways that you might do that? And I made some notes for myself on, what are reasons to pick one chit or the other. And that's a huge part of the operational gameplay as well. It starts to lean into tactical a little bit, where you're trying to figure out, what kind of fight do I want to have? It reminds me a bit of the AGOD, the old AGOD PC games, where you're telling your army forces to have a particular posture. Are we going to fight really hard here, or are we going to give up? Are you going to press the enemy or not? And that is a huge element to the system, I think, in understanding, like, at what point do you use one or the other, and when there are good leaders to make up the difference, because a good leader with a high initiative against a leader with a low initiative is going to be able to actually pursue you if you retreat away, and in pursuit is where you're going to take your combat losses, and it could actually be pretty bad. In this game, if you retreat over an unfrozen river, your losses could be double if the enemy can pursue you up to at least the river line. So there are these tactical elements. You're worried about the operational movement of your forces across the map. You're tactically trying to figure out the right circumstances for combat, and even strategically, you're managing your administrative points and your logistics hubs and your supply depots, and looking across the whole map to make sure that the enemy is not going to come in around your flank and cut your line of supply. So this game provides this kind of full spectrum consideration of what you're doing throughout the whole game. The sequence of play is really straightforward because it's administrative phase. Okay, you get reinforcements, you get replacements. You're going to maybe get some additional administrative points. You're going to move your stuff. Your enemy's going to possibly force march, and then you do combat. So the actual okay, this is how the sequence of play goes. It's pretty simple, but each element as you play the game requires some thought and some consideration of, well, can I get over here? What happens if I create this detachment and send it over down on the flank and create some redundant supply depots? And you can start to figure some of these things out. And then you pair this game with some of the history books, whether we're talking about Chandler or something else. It's really interesting to see the conundrum that Napoleon found himself in of wanting to keep the Russian forces separated and try to eliminate, like one army, eliminate Bagration or Barclay individually, and how hard it is to actually do that, and the sacrifices you would need to make to do that very effectively. And I think the game does a pretty good job of forcing you to look at that. You can read the books, the history books or analysis of the campaign, while looking at the map and kind of understand the difficulty, and I think the game mechanics actually reinforce it quite a lot. Now, I did find I didn't take as much attrition in my campaign playthrough as I might have thought, but I also didn't push as hard, I think, as historically the French did. So that might be on me, but the fact that that was a huge part of my thought process and how I played the game is a really good sign. Now, the objective of the game ultimately is to, as the French, get your way to Moscow and ideally do it with high morale so you can bring the Tsar to terms and sign some kind of peace treaty. I think the game at the political level does a good job of making the places matter and forcing carrots and sticks on the players to where they actually have to be cautious and conscious of the morale level. So if the French can do some big damage to the Russian army and get morale point increases from that, then it means that holding on to the cities might become even more important than it was before, where historically, because the Russian army never really got terribly mauled throughout the campaign, that the French were so dependent on taking these cities in the hope of getting morale point increases. And the way that the fire table works, where the city catches on fire and you might not get any morale point increases for capturing these cities, means that you're basically forced to fight in the face of bad luck, or at least you're drawn onward by that hope that luck's going to go your way, which feels appropriate. It forces you to still say, no, I got to go for Moscow. I have no choice. I have to go to Moscow, or I'm not going to have enough, to last the game, or I'm not in good enough shape. If I lose Smolensk, then I'm going to lose the game, so I have to push to Moscow. You get into that thinking of okay, I got to push on. I got to make something happen. Or maybe I've beat up the Russians so badly that I'm going to take my time getting to Moscow and force the Tsar to a peace treaty. Both players are affected by that interpretation of the Paris morale track, and how the game plays out from the beginning to the end. So every event, big event, like an army being defeated or a city being captured, could change the way that the players are interpreting the progression of the campaign. And I think that's really interesting too. So, probably need to wrap this up, guys. So here's the thing I would say about this game. It is rough around the edges. The rules leave a lot to be desired, and I think that they could be polished up over time to be much better. Now, I don't know that that's going to happen. So if you're going to get this game, if you're going to play it, know that you're going to run into some challenges with the rules. It's just going to be a part of it. If you played other games in the series, then this might be much easier for you to absorb. Uh, but if you're a new player, it's going to be trickier. Having said that, I think the game gives something that is really compelling. It's a game experience that is very compelling, very interesting to actually play on the table. When you're moving and grooving, like you've got the rules, okay, now I just need to play it. The game is quite fun. You're not sure what's going to happen. There can be weird upsets, leaders not making their initiative die rolls where they really need to, um, or really bad attrition results that change the way that your whole battle plan was going to go. You thought you were going to show up at that battle with more forces than you actually do, and that's a big deal. And I could certainly see where the fog of war element in an opposed game, which I did not experience because it's solitaire, so I didn't use vedettes, which is a whole thing in the game, and I could see each other's forces, whatever. If you're playing that fog of war, I feel like the game can get even more tense because you just don't know what you're dealing with until you scout the enemy forces, and that chaos of war, your attrition, losing men, the circumstances of battle maybe not being what you want it to be. I mean, all that should come together really interestingly, and even in a solitaire context, it was plenty fun to play. I think this game does a treatment of this particular campaign in a way that feels appropriate to what was going on, provides a bandwidth for some alternative choices and approaches that could work out or might not work out, and it depends on who you're playing against. Um, so to me, ultimately, the juice was worth the squeeze. It may not be for everybody. So this is not like, hey, I recommend it to everybody and their mom. I can't say that today. I can say if you're willing to put up with some hard absorption of the rules, maybe, um, which should be easier for you than it was for me at this point. If you can put up with some tougher rules, if you're willing to deal with a little bit of a bumpy road, I think the game can provide a really compelling game experience that's worthwhile. That if you were really interested in Napoleonic campaigns, if you're really interested in this one in particular, the invasion of Russia and the eventual retreat, I think this is a must play if you're an aficionado of the topic, absolutely. And if you're not, then it's really a question of can you deal with a tough squeeze to get the juice? The juice is good. You're going to have to squeeze, okay? That's what it's going to come down to. If you can do those things, then this game is a recommendation. If you are not the type of person that can do that, you really want an easy breezy game learning experience, then it might not be for you, but you're leaving some stuff on the table there that you might really enjoy. So that's what I can say. I do want to thank Kevin Zucker for providing support and help in learning the rules along the way and answering those questions. You can do that too. So there is a way to get over that learning curve. This game is still, I believe, available on the OSG website, so you can get it, you can play it, you can have a good time. You're going to have to work a little harder for it than you might have thought. But again, the game experience just comes together really, really well. I really enjoyed it once I got actually playing it, and I'm really interested to play other games in the series, including the Bonaparte in Italy reprint. It's going to be Bonaparte in Italy 3. That's going to be coming out in a couple years. That is on pre-order right now on the OSG webpage. And not only is it going to be covering the War of the First Coalition campaign in Italy, it also looks like, and I didn't realize this, it might also be including scenarios for the War of the Second Coalition in Italy. So it's going to actually be more than the previous versions. I have Bonaparte in Italy 2, I think. I picked up a copy of that. I'm probably still going to get 3 at this point. If it's going to include new content, that'll be worth it for me, I think. So anyway, there you go, guys. It is a recommend under certain circumstances from me. There is a really great game experience to be had here if you can get over the hump. And that's it. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the review. I hope it's useful to you in thinking about this game. Again, you can watch the rest of the content on my channel all around the gameplay and seeing it in action and all the clunkiness that came with that. But check it out. Hope you enjoyed. In the meantime, guys, we'll see you later. Take care. Keep gaming.